Today, we're going to be talking about relapse prevention. As a matter of fact, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about just relapse prevention. Because although I receive a lot of different questions from brothers, most of them have to do with relapse prevention, whether it's the mindset, strategies, tools they can use. So without further ado, we're going to start this by talking about the definition of relapse prevention. I'll start with what a relapse is not. So a relapse is not a return to the behavior that you are trying to change, no matter how minor it is. So here's an example. Let's say you've stayed off pornography for almost a year, 10-ish, 11-ish months. Then something happens and you end up visiting a porn site once. Maybe you spend a couple of minutes on there. You don't really edge, but it's a shock to you. It's a shock to your system. So much dopamine is released. You feel good, you feel bad, you feel shame, you feel guilt, you're just confused. And you're, oh, no, I've come too far, 10, 11-ish months. No, I can't do this. So you back off. But you tell yourself, you know what? I feel like shit right now for doing this. I am so disappointed because I've gone for 10-ish, 11-ish months with none of this in my life. And I would still go back to this stuff. You didn't masturbate. You didn't edge. But all those familiar feelings came up. And so you tell yourself, you know what? That's a relapse. I'm still a porn addict. I can't believe that I would do that. If I can do this after 10-ish, 11-ish months, what am I capable of? Or let's say you tell yourself another scenario. You've stayed off pornography for a couple of weeks. I'll be honest with you guys, the timelines are not really important to us here at Porn Reboot, but for many of you who are not in the system, it's relevant because you're not yet at the point where counting doesn't matter to you. At least I'm assuming that. So you're in this situation where you've been off pornography for a couple of weeks, okay? And you ended up one day having a really tough day. And it was just a culmination of a whole bunch of different things. Your wife or girlfriend gave you grief. You had a shitty day at work. You get some notification from your credit card. There's a freaking fraud alert. There's just all these things you got to do. So you end up edging a few times. Now, you don't masturbate, but you edge a few times. Just throughout the day, you look at porn, you edge, but you're just like, no. I cannot give in. This is the time when I'm supposed to be strong. This is the time when I'm not supposed to give in. So I'm not going to. Let's say you take it even further. Maybe you're a guy who acts out, like you visit escorts. And so you get on the escort site. You're not going to do anything. You know you're not going to, but you have the intention, and your subconscious mind knows that the intention of doing this releases some feel-good chemicals. So you jump on the escort sites and you begin to browse, but you don't actually contact anyone. But you also feel some kind of way. You feel shame, you feel guilt, and then for the next couple of hours, you edge even more. And so you just tell yourself, you know what? That's a relapse. Like, I did this for 24 hours, all night, then the next day, all the way till the next night. And it just feels horrible. Now I've unblocked certain things. I'm back on Instagram. A lot of boundaries have been crossed. And I have a lot of these things in my life. Maybe you've even taken your porn blocker off, but you still haven't ejaculated. You still haven't masturbated to orgasm, but in your head, and you still haven't visited with an escort, but in your head, you're still a sex addict. Now, traditionally, gentlemen, relapse has carried a negative, this all or nothing connotation, which personally and professionally, I think is absolutely ridiculous because the addictive behavior is internal. It is biologically driven, and it is beyond your conscious control. So this is a very antiquated way of, it's the disease model to treat addiction as a disease. But here is the difference when it comes to rebooting. So let's say you were in Alcoholics Anonymous. Let's use that for an example. A relapse in something like Alcoholics Anonymous would be, Jim, you've been off alcohol for 20 years, and then you lost someone in your family. Something tragic, traumatic happened, and you had a drink. Well, buddy, you just relapsed to alcoholism. Like Jim relapsed, he had a drink. That's the way it works. crazy. Now, I can go deeper into that on the reason why that would happen after 20 years and so on and so forth as a result of the model they're using. But here's the thing, with rebooting, relapse is defined as a planned and repeated violation of a self-imposed rule or set of rules which dictates your rate or pattern of an unwanted sexual behavior. I'll say it again. The definition of relapse, according to rebooting, it is defined as a planned and repeated violation of a self-imposed rule or set of rules which dictates your rate or pattern of an unwanted sexual behavior. What does this actually mean? Well, first of all, there's some key phrases in there. The first one is planned and repeated. That defines a reboot, first of all. If you planned it and then you repeated it, it wasn't an unconscious thing that came out when you were having a shitty day. You knew you were going to do this. You were going through the day, you were feeling lonely, and you were like, fuck it. I'm lonely. I feel bad because my wife left me and I haven't had a girlfriend and I haven't been laid in a while. Woe is me. You know what? Fuck it. Tonight I'm going to masturbate. Or I had such a terrible day at work. It's been such a crazy week. You know what? There's nothing that I can see. There's nothing I know that's going to make me feel better. You know what? I deserve to jerk off. I'm a man. I deserve it. Just one time nothing's going to happen. That's planned. And if it repeats itself and it's not just a slip, then you got a problem. The second part of this is self-imposed. Define your reboot, gentlemen. You have to set the rules for yourself by the time you get to the middle stage of your reboot. It's okay, in the early stage of your reboot, we'll set them for you because you're completely unconscious of your behavior. You might even be in a relapse at the point you join the system. But by the time you get to your middle reboot and you've gained some measure of control, I don't care what you define it as. Once you've got some consciousness, some awareness, some idea of how you interact with your addict personality and how this addictive behavior impacts you, it's time for you to start setting rules based on your lifestyle, based on your environment, based on your actual healthy sexual behavior. Do you have access to sex? Are you single? Are you planning to stay single? Are you waiting for marriage? Are you having sex? Can your partner have sex? Like, what is going on? What is self-imposed for you? What's your natural sex drive like? Again, by the time you start getting to the middle stage of your reboot, not in the early stage when you can't tell the difference. The reason this definition was created was so that everything, right from the end of the early stage of your reboot, that is going into the middle stage of your reboot, all the way to the maintenance stage of your reboot, would be within the conscious control of you, the rebooter. Because there is so much that is out of control. You cannot let an organization, a group, a step whatever, a religion tell you what a relapse is. We are all different people. Just because Jim had a drink 20 years from now and did not repeat it does not mean that it's the end of the world for Jim. Maybe it means it's time for Jim to have a drink once a year. Who knows? But he can't be given some crazy sentence. This is the religion of recovery where people go, even saying that, I want you to check in with yourself. When I said earlier that maybe it's time for Jim to have a drink once a year. How many of you, did you have a reaction? Did you go like, oh no, like it's the rule. Alcoholics, they can't do that. They can't have one drink a year. That means it's gonna go downhill. You see it in the movies. I've seen it in family members, dude. Like one drink and he becomes a raging monster and he wakes up next to a trash. Who said that? Really? It's cognitive dissonance. Does it happen? Yes. Does it happen more because people have bought into the belief that that is how it's supposed to be? Absolutely. And what we do with rebooting is, first of all, alcoholism and your behavior, your sexual behavior are two different things. Understand that model from alcoholism has been taken by people who, unfortunately, have not gone through this behavior themselves and successfully controlled it. And secondly, who had no methodology, who use the alcoholism model to treat their out-of-control sexual behavior. Now, it's working for them. They are, quote-unquote, sober and in recovery for XXX number of years, or XX number of years, but they're still using willpower. If they masturbate once, it might be the end of the world. God forbid that they masturbate to porn 20 years from now, one time, back to square one. That is crazy, as far as I'm concerned. Time and time again, I have seen men who subscribe to this model, what I call the disease model, or you can call it the religion of recovery. Whether they do so consciously or unconsciously, end up beating themselves up for years. The person that is put on the pedestal in this model, the person that you're supposed to look up to, is some guy who has used willpower, so he claims, to stay off this behavior for years. He's changed his entire lifestyle. He's really put these powerful, he's covenanted for 20 years. What else has he done if that's the case? He's not looked at another woman for 20 years. Literally, he's like, I've never looked or thought of another woman in a sexual manner for 20 years. I find that very freaking hard to believe. I find it very hard to believe. Anyway, let's continue. The point is that if such a person is what you're aiming for, then you are going to have to adjust your life to live as close to theirs as possible, which is unnatural. Because biologically speaking, you are not that person. Your arousal template is different. The things you're into are different. Your sexual plans are different. All those things are different. Your environment is different. It's already challenging in the alcoholism model. And actually, a great thing that's happening these days is that there are a lot of new methodologies out there that are coming out, which are far superior to the AA method, which is the traditional method. There's so many methodologies that are bringing people a lot more control over their lives. So this is just is the single most destructive recovery, in quotes, belief out there. It's second only to the belief that you can use willpower to control your sexual behavior. You're still out there thinking that willpower can use willpower to control this. You are playing yourself. So, it's rough, guys, when a person's therapist, the person's religious leader whom they trust, person's wife, person's girlfriend just admonishes them each time they return to their behavior, even once. The implication is always that you are still an addict. And what comes with that? That you are still filled with shame. That you're still a bad person. That you're still, if you're a Christian, you're still a lustful person. You're still a person who has no control. And then what are all the other subconscious messages, or rather unconscious, not subconscious, unconscious messages attached to this? That I'm incapable of doing this and that. That I do not have willpower. That I'm not deserving of love. That I'm so lucky to be in this place and I'm fucking it up. That I hate myself. It's not worth it, guys. Weeks, months, even years of your progress are wiped out due to this belief. I edged once. I went on this site once. Therefore, I'm a fucker. You are a human being, guys. You're a human being. And that's why it's so important. I'll talk about this later. This is the end of this part. At the end of the day, it is not a return to the behavior that you're trying to change. That is not the definition of a relapse. And the key phrase here is no matter how minor, it does matter. You have to impose the rule on yourself when you get to a certain level of control. The final thing that I'd like to share today, and pardon me for not being that organized, I'm just speaking off the top of my head. This is something that just came to mind actually, is I remember over the past decade, and even some men in our program have seen this, there are gentlemen who got to a point where they do not view pornography at all. They do not step out on their partners. They do not visit with escorts, but they do masturbate. And I'm not even going to use the term masturbation in moderation because the meaning of that has completely changed. In fact, it could almost equate, you might as well relapse. So what I'm going to say, because what is moderation? It's very subjective. They masturbate when they're in certain situations. I'll give you a few scenarios, which I've spoken about in other episodes. A man is unable to have sexual intimacy with his wife because his wife is going through some sort of procedure, or she's having some slight mental health issue. Maybe she's going through postpartum depression. Maybe she's going through something else. a gentleman comes from an Islamic culture or a very conservative Christian culture where having sex prior to marriage is frowned upon and there are consequences, societal consequences, sometimes even severe consequences, natural sex drive in both cases. These men no longer view pornography. They no longer visit with escorts. They no longer, those who are in relationships but who cannot have sex with their wives, are no longer stepping out to get side pieces or whatever there is out there. But they now understand that when their natural sex drive, when that need for intimacy is strong, they can masturbate in a healthy way. Now, I don't want to get into the details of it for fear of triggering anybody who is listening to this, but these men are not engaging in this behavior repeatedly. Why? Because they have self-imposed rules or a self-imposed set of rules which dictates their behavior. And that is one of the things that you have to set when you're rebooting. I'm not saying that you have to set a time where you can masturbate necessarily. I've also mentioned that there are some men who are in a situation where masturbation almost inevitably leads to pornography. And I personally am one of those men, but I can acknowledge that there are men who are not in that situation, who get back to what I would call healthy, quote unquote, normal behavior. And frankly speaking, when I speak for myself, I can't be sure anymore. I'm not going to try. Trust me on that. I'm not going to try. Maybe things have changed in 14 years, but I do not want to find out. I just know that I've been okay thus far. But I do have an active sexual life, and I ensure that I do. So I hope this doesn't come across as random, gentlemen. I'll be jumping into a second part of this to clarify this definition of relapse prevention further. So again, I'll leave you with the Porn Reboot definition of a relapse, which is a planned and repeated violation of a self-imposed rule or set of rules which dictates the rate or pattern of an unwanted sexual behavior.